Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show Stadicus to talk all things Bitbox, hardware wallets, security, and yes, not your keys, not your Bitcoin, which is super important, talking to folks about self-custody and understanding why this is so important. So in this episode, we get into all of that. We touch on some security kind of at a high level view of why self-custody is so important. What is it? The features of Bitbox and obviously a hardware wallet we highly recommend here and that I use quite frequently as my Bitbox as one of our show sponsors and supporters, which you can check out in the show notes as always at bitbox.swish/TPB. You can get 5% off their Bitcoin hardware wallet that I would highly recommend. So please check that out. And I think you'll really, really enjoy this conversation as well. We talk about a lot of different things, what security model is best depending on who you are, just different recommendations there, and understanding what might be the most technically secure, might not actually be the most secure if you lose access to your Bitcoin. So just understanding all of these things, talking about the trade-offs of obviously centralized exchanges and why self-custody is so important to Bitcoin and to owning your own Bitcoin private keys. So we get into that, and it's a really good episode to share with your friends that maybe are starting to get into Bitcoin and really want to understand, okay, how do I own my own Bitcoin? How do I secure my private keys? Because that's something you can do with Bitcoin, is you can actually own your Bitcoin rather than just thinking you own your cash in a bank that we're used to these trust models. With Bitcoin, you can actually own and hold your own private keys, and it is yours. And there's more ways than ever to do that, which we talk about in this episode. So thanks so much, Stadicus, for jumping on. And also mention to folks, we've been doing bonus content for our paid subscribers. So you're here in this episode, our traditional episode for those that are listening, and then you'll hear some of the bonus content we get into as well, which I mentioned. So if you want to listen and access that bonus content, I think we talked for about 45 minutes afterwards, just about different models. We got into democracy in Switzerland and what some things that we can learn here in the US about direct democracy approach and just the politicization of everything in the US. We talk about that a lot as well on this podcast, and just in general. We talk about, why Bitcoin and just the ethos of being an entrepreneur in this space and how important that is. So if you want to get access to the full conversation, it would really mean a lot to us because we really heavily rely on you, our listeners, to keep our diverse content going and reaching mainstream and liberal and progressive audiences all around the world that have really resonated with our message that Bitcoin is for everyone. So if you want to subscribe, we'd really, really love and appreciate that. And we try to make it super affordable as well, while also helping us grow and cover our costs and do what we need to do so that we can expand the show. So that's going to be in the show notes, but it's always progressivebitcoiner.substack.com/subscribe, and you'll find different options there. And you can also subscribe via our Geyser Fund. If you want to pay in Bitcoin, you can actually get a lifetime membership. So head to our Geyser Fund and you'll find that a lifetime member reward as well available there. So please be sure to do that if you want access to all of our content, bonus content, early episodes, and the like. And thank you so much to our supporters. We truly couldn't do it without your moral support. Just the messages you send us, as well as your financial contributions, really help us continue spreading the message that Bitcoin is for everyone, and all the important things we talk about with Bitcoin for human rights, Bitcoin for environmental causes, a lot of really, really important things of the why for Bitcoin. So I want to thank everyone so much. And please be sure to share this episode far and wide, like and subscribe wherever you listen. All right, I'll let you get to this great conversation now, and we'll see you again next week. Stadicus, welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner. How are you?
Hey Trey, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, excited to have you on. Excited to talk all things Bitbox, all things self-custody, hardware wallets, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. That is going to be the focus of this show. But before we jump in too much, folks listening to us have heard quite a bit about Bitbox. It's our recommended hardware wallet. It's the one I use all the time, that I was just telling you how much it's my favorite hardware wallet that I've used in the space and really enjoy and obviously recommend to people. But before we jump in, can you talk to people about your background, what your focus is on Bitcoin, and what you're doing in terms of Bitbox as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm a IT engineer, more on the business side. I've been working for consultancy companies, the Big Four, stuff like that. But then I discovered Bitcoin, and at some point I just couldn't balance it out, like doing my regular fiat mining and then doing my open source projects like the Raspberry Bolt, for example, on the side. And yeah, I think 2018 or 19, I got the chance to really dive into the Bitcoin ecosystem, and now I'm a co-founder of Bitbox. Unfortunately, we no longer do the Bitbox base, which was my first Bitbox like full node project. But it was a different time where there wasn't really a good free option out there. Today there's many. So today we're really focusing on secure self custody for everyone, like super simple, minimal, no distractions, and the least amount of foot guns you can imagine.
So you mentioning obviously co-founder of Bitbox 2018, 2019. Can you talk to folks about that time in Bitcoin's history? I think from my perspective, and I didn't get in until early 2021 that I've mentioned many times on this show, but reading the block size wars, being kind of nerding out on a lot of Bitcoin history, I think 2018, 2019, from my perspective on what I've read of it, is there was a lot of legitimacy happening in terms of Bitcoin. Like there were more Bitcoin companies coming about. Obviously, mining became a bigger thing. There were more products and more kind of obviously this is a few years after things like Coinbase and others, but really the notion that Bitcoin is going to start being everywhere and more
Mhm.
options and self custody and all of these things. Lightning, a lot of things were coming up around that time. So talk to me about the beginnings of Bitbox, of starting, being an entrepreneur in this space, and what the priorities were then versus what the priorities are now.
Okay, that's an interesting question. I mean, for me personally, I came into the space quite a bit earlier, but as most of us, I had my shitcoin phase. Although I did sell everything thanks to Andreas Antonopoulos, I'm still like very thankful that he cut my shitcoin phase pretty short. After that, and especially during 2017-18 with the block size wars, that really radicalized me towards Bitcoin only and running full nodes. This also got me started building Bitcoin full nodes on a Raspberry Pi, because exactly this notion that it's not the miners that dictate consensus, but it's the users, but only the users that actually run their own full node and validate their own transactions, stuff like that. That really got me into the space at full speed and basically got me known a little bit in the nerdy part of things. Yeah, and I mean the Bitbox itself, it did start with Jonas Schnelli and Douglas Beckham before myself. Before I joined, that was like 2015. These two guys started with the Bitbox 01, but it didn't have a screen, so it was like everybody was trying to figure it out how to build a secure product that is usable. Because if you go to Reddit back in these days, you see so many sob stories, people losing coins because they built their own air gapped laptop vaults with Glacier protocol and stuff like that. It was like really hard to self custody coins. And I think hardware wallets really brought that to a next level in terms of ease of use, because it's not just a signing device. I think what we want to make is really a full-fledged product that starts from information, the website. You buy it anonymously if you want. You pay in Bitcoin or Lightning. You can ship it to like an anonymous shipping station, and then it's just easy to use. And we really take the ease of use very seriously, because we want to build a product that I can recommend to my own parents, for example. Our main target audience is not really the hardcore nerds, would say. They like to play around, and I'm one of them, I have to say. But we're really building towards the next million or Bitcoiners that will join the space. And we want to give them no excuse to keep their coins on an exchange, but take them into their own custody and really own their Bitcoin.
Yeah, I'm one of those users that when I got into Bitcoin, I bought Bitcoin. I what were the I bought a couple of other things as well, and within 2 months, like sold it because I was scared it was a rug pull, which it was in some regards. Different platforms had those experiences for 2 months. But the one thing I try to relate to people that are very concerned about when people start their journey in one area that probably isn't the most secure or the best, I quickly, because I really cared about Bitcoin and in my Bitcoin and securing it, I was like, let me make sure I'm doing this right. So I went on all the Reddit forums. I started running a full node, all of these things. And I had no technical background. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying everyone will do that, but I think there is this notion once Bitcoin really clicks for you, you want to own it. You want to
Hmm.
have it because it's the one thing we can have,
Yes.
right? It doesn't require a central authority and central exchange or bank. And that's one of the beauties of it. So realizing that, and now even compared to 2021, there's probably double the options of things, which is really cool. But coming to the main point and the main crux of I think this episode of not your keys, not your coins, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. Why do you think that's such an important lesson for people to think about? And how do you think that can be hard for someone to really understand that is coming from the normal world into Bitcoin?
Hmm. What fascinates me so much about Bitcoin is that it has so many layers. I approached it from a technical perspective. This was why I run Bitcoin Core and full nodes and stuff like that, just because it's fun. Um, but others approach it from a monetary perspective, or simply from a real world use case because they need Bitcoin, which is usually not the case, let's say, in first world countries. We don't really need another payment system. We don't really need like yet another shiny rock. Um, but Bitcoin can be so many things and to so many people, so many different things. And this is what I think is super important to preserve, that Bitcoin is what it is, and we should not like abstract it too much, because for me it's the best form of money that humanity ever had. It's like gold that you can just send around the world using information technology. It's the one scarce thing that we know how many Bitcoin will be there in 50 years. And all that, which makes Bitcoin unique and also sets it apart from all the other crypto stuff, is exactly that: the network, the asset, that people can run the node, that they can validate their own transactions, and that they can really, like, physically, in a sense of mathematically own Bitcoin. But all that is only true if you custody your own Bitcoin. If you buy a Bitcoin and just leave them on an exchange, all you have is an IOU against the exchange. So they promise you to give you back the monetary value of that Bitcoin eventually, while they're still around. But I'd say today that's even the better solution, because if you buy an ETF, you don't even have any chance of ever getting your physical Bitcoin out of that. It's pure paper Bitcoin, and that's also the case with gold. I think there's like a common saying that there's 8 times the amount of gold in paper gold that there's physical gold in existence. And of course, that fully undermines the value of gold and how it can be resilient in times of crisis. And for Bitcoin, it's so easy to self custody, especially today. And it's not even that expensive. I mean, you buy a hardware wallet and you're done. There's not a huge 100-pound treasure that you need to have in your basement and that is eventually full. That costs probably hundreds or thousands of dollars. You just get a hardware wallet and you can keep your Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about, and I try to step back a lot, even just doing this podcast, talking to friends, because there's such this notion of trust with any of these type of monetary assets or whatever we have. You have it in a bank account. You have just the basic notion of what that means, and that with Bitcoin you don't have to do that trust based model with these things is such a genius hack, and that it's easier than ever, and truly easier than ever. And there's all sorts of different types and models in the competitive community pushing back on each other with different most of the, I don't want to say most of the projects, but I think most of the best projects are open source, and you're kind of seeing updates and folks competing with each other to get these types of things into the hands of as many people as possible. So with with Bitbox and what you all are doing and approaching, what is your ideal user and customer? I think what has been the experience of people that you're really trying to target with the Bitbox hardware wallet, and what is the hope and goals with folks using this?
I wouldn't say we have an ideal user, but the Bitbox can be an ideal product for a certain target audience. I think the Bitbox itself does exactly what you would expect from a hardware wallet. It's secure. I think that's the case with most reputable hardware wallets. So that's not really a unique selling point. So security is a given. But then I think is already the decision. What do you want? What do you prioritize? We prioritize ease of use over most other things because we think ease of use is part of security. If it's just technically secure, but you as a user can basically lock yourself out because you're forced to use complicated additional passwords or whatever cryptographic schemes that might be absolutely awesome in a theoretical world, we see that this doesn't hold up in the real world. And we want to build like a super simple product that you can basically set up in 2 minutes. You have your backup and you're done. That's our goal. And of course, that mostly appeals to people that value that. We do offer, for example, concierge onboarding. You can book like a 1 hour call for us to help you set up the Bitbox. But the fun stuff is that usually people buy that, and when we have the call, they already set it up. And that's even true for people like 70 plus. So we don't really push that onboarding too much. But for us, we like to do it because some people still need it or they're just unsure or need some additional guidance. But for us, it's also a really good tool for getting direct market feedback because we see where people struggle, where they have doubts. Maybe it's just the wording that make them unsure if they're doing it right. And the little things I think is super important to value and make it the best user experience that you can get. And that's of course the user perspective. From a technical perspective, I could talk a lot more how we pioneered the dual chip approach, like a secure chip, but still open source. For everything we do is open source. That's a given. I think that's very, very important. And in my personal view, closed source code is just not good enough to touch my Bitcoin keys. So I want to have a machine that keeps my Bitcoin secure, that is transparent and I can check. And I know it's secure despite me checking every detail and not relying on it that it's secure because it's a black box. And you mentioned the different projects in the space. We keep ourselves or each other accountable. I think we made responsible disclosures to almost every company in the space. And some mentioned some stuff to us, of course, which we fixed as quickly as possible. And I think this is how we grow as a company, but also as an industry and as an ecosystem. Because only if your code is open and you're not shy about other people looking at it and telling you how you might improve it, I think then this is how you can basically scale security in the long term.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think there's some technical things I'll ask you, but we also did an episode a few months ago with Ben DeWall where we said, "What is Bitcoin?" And he talked about kind of unlocking boxes and keys and mining. So we went into that. So if people are wanting another deep dive on that, I would recommend Ben's episode. We'll touch on some of that here, but I have some other fun questions for you as well. But can you walk through just at a basic level for folks that are coming in and they're like, okay, I have some Bitcoin in Cash App or Coinbase, or okay, I learned about Strike and bought it here in the US or wherever they are, around the world buying their Bitcoin. And they're like, I'm trying to figure out what is the best way to do self-custody. But I think what are some important things to understand about what self-custody actually is, right? Because some of it is just, I don't get too caught up in terminology and things like that, but there's the notion of like, okay, owning your Bitcoin. It's like, well, it's actually owning your private keys. So can we talk a little bit about, what are private keys? And then in the case of Bitbox and most hardware wallets, the importance of cold storage. So can you talk about those two things for people that are unfamiliar?
Definitely. So from a very high level perspective, let's say you just bought Bitcoin, small fraction, maybe a little bit more that you already value, that it's not trivial if you lose it. And the first step that you need to think about, is this Bitcoin still in the possession of someone else? Is it with a custodian, with an exchange, or in form of an ETF or whatever? And I would say that is a pity, because Bitcoin in itself is a better asset. It's like physical gold. You can get it. You can have it yourself. Why would you let someone else dictate what you can use it for? Because this is what happens even in like developed countries like US or Switzerland, that suddenly you're forced to do like additional KYC checks, or they say, yeah, you're not allowed to send your Bitcoin to this address because we don't really know and we don't tell you, but it raised some flags. So get the Bitcoin off an exchange. That's the first step. And if it's not too much, it's totally fine to just use it on a mobile wallet, for example. Get a good free software wallet on your mobile phone, maybe with Lightning support, stuff like that. And that's already like a huge step, because now you actually own your Bitcoin. You control your own private keys, even if you never see them. It's just like the technical thing beneath it, right? If you have a wallet, you control it's. A wallet is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually more of a keyring, but well, let's stay with the convention and call it a wallet. So you actually own your Bitcoin. But of course, if you hold your Bitcoin on a platform like the mobile phone or your laptop that is not inherently secure, because you run other software on it, or there could be malware, stuff like that, viruses. If any other software gets access to your private keys, an attacker can just like move your Bitcoin away and they're basically gone forever. So there's always a bit of a stretch between convenience. Like, of course, a mobile wallet with Lightning is super convenient. I have probably all of them, but I use a few like on a daily basis. That's just my daily spending wallet. But I wouldn't keep my life savings on a mobile phone, even if I have a backup. But if there's some, I don't know what Candy Crush malware app gets access to my private keys, suddenly my wallet is empty. And that's just not something that I would like to experience. And this is where like mobile wallets are usually hot wallets, hot because they're on a platform that is directly connected to the internet. And you mentioned cold storage. A cold wallet is then exactly where hardware wallets come into play. Of course, you wouldn't buy like $150 hardware wallet if you just bought your first $5 of Bitcoin, but maybe you have 500 or 1,000 or whatever, and you start thinking about how to secure them in the long run. And then it's definitely time to look into hardware wallets, because hardware wallets have basically two main functionalities, two features that are really essential. The first one is to create your Bitcoin keys offline. So when you get a hardware wallet, it will be empty. It will not be set up for you. You need to set it up by yourself. And while you set it up, there's crypto magic going on that derives like super random large numbers that basically create your Bitcoin keys. And the hardware wallet promises that these keys never leave the device. So that means that you can use Bitcoin securely in unsecure environments. You can then receive and send Bitcoin on your mobile phone, on your laptop, without worrying that any random other software could get access to your keys. And this is part, for example, of the Bitbox security model. We always assume that your host device, like the smartphone, for example, including the Bitbox app, is fully compromised. This is our basic presumption. And we design the Bitbox device itself in a way that even then the coins are secure. And the second thing is that once you, of course, have the keys, you still need to use it. You need to use them to send and receive. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. So the Bitcoin hardware wallet needs to have some way to let you verify what you're actually doing with it, to show you a receive address that you can verify, or to show you where you are sending Bitcoin, to what recipient, how much, and with what amount of fees. And typically it needs a screen on the device itself so that you can check what you're actually signing with your keys. And if you have like the keys securely created, contained within the hardware wallet, and the hardware wallet is built in a way that lets you verify everything that you sign with it, then you already have a very, very high level of security for your coins.
Mm. Yeah, those are a good breakdown of just walking through the steps of what it's like. And I know, regardless of how simple these things can be when someone using it, it is a very it can be a very nerve-wracking process. There is no undo with
Yes.
with a true, like a Bitcoin send receive in a hardware wallet. I think there's other tools and other things that will be coming out, and different security models and all of these other layers that aren't necessarily for this episode, or maybe even some of this audience, right? There's a lot of cool things that, we'll continue to see being built on Bitcoin, which is one of the cool things about being in the space, building on the space in general. But I wanted to go touch on one point that you mentioned, just for you to break down a little more. So with the Bitbox app in this case, and most hardware wallets have some sort of app that you interface with, whether it's from your phone or whether your laptop. So for myself, my Bitbox is like my daily driver in terms of that savings model and that cold storage model. And I typically use like an iPhone, so I'm using a lot of this through like a desktop, right? For those of us that use iOS, which is fine for me. It's what I use Bitbox for, compared to other Lightning wallets where I have it on mobile, and it's a lot lower threshold in terms of maybe a security model, but I'm using it for that cash in your wallet type thing versus a vault where you don't want anyone else accessing or touching it. So you had mentioned that even if you assume that the Bitbox app, which again can be on your actual computer or on phone, Android, is corrupt, that your keys and your Bitcoin are still safe. Can you talk to people about how, okay, they're looking at that and it seems to be, wait, my Bitbox is connected to that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean that we'll assume that even if that's corrupted, my keys are safe? Because I'm sure, as you were saying that, I could imagine someone saying, how does that part work?
If you want to interact with the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, there always needs to be some sort of communication or going over, typically over the internet. So this is where what we call a companion app comes in. It's the Bitbox app for the Bitbox. There are other companion apps for other hardware wallet providers. And these are always connected to the internet because they need to check your addresses, if you received coins, how's your wallet balance. That's on the blockchain, right? And that can change every 10 minutes with the new block. So it needs to have a way to look up the balances and basically just monitor what you're doing, or what you're receiving. And what a typical companion app allows you to do is have like a very nice user interface that allows you to prepare a transaction. If I want to send you a bit of Bitcoin, I can prepare the transaction. I know how many Bitcoin I have in my wallet. I have your receive address. I can prepare everything. And then the companion app sends the unsigned transaction to the Bitbox. And what the Bitbox does, and what it's very essential, and every hardware wallet needs to do, regardless if it's a USB or micro SD card or QR codes, the absolute most important thing is that it validates the input that it gets from the companion app. Because it should never trust the companion app, because it can be compromised. It can also be the real deal, but the communication is somehow intercepted in the middle. So you never know what you get as a hardware wallet. And the device needs to be super skeptical. And this is the reason why purpose-built electronics is so secure, because there's no operating system running on the hardware wallet. The Bitbox might look like a USB stick, but of course it isn't. It is a small mini computer, but it doesn't have an operating system. It has the software runs directly on the chip, and it has a very, very well defined API, an application programming interface, that just gives you a few commands. Everything else is simply ignored. And there is simply no command like give me your private keys, right? So the most you could do is to somehow try to find a vulnerability to trick the device into signing something that the user is maybe not expecting. And stuff like that happens. But that's the core job description of a hardware wallet, to detect stuff that is somehow not really following the specification. And if in doubt, simply abort all communication. Or if it's okay, if there comes a transaction that is not yet signed to a certain address, it shows you on the screen where Bitcoin is going to be sent, how much Bitcoin is going to be sent, with what fees. And this is what the user needs to confirm themselves, because, of course, a malicious Bitbox app or any malware could simply swap out the address. And then I want to send you like 0.5 Bitcoin. And you give me address, I enter the same address and I see the address, but the software sends a different address to the Bitbox to sign. And the address goes out and you'll never get any Bitcoin because it's directly sent to North Korea or wherever the attacker sits. So there's a lot of checks when it comes to the validity of the data that is received. And if in doubt, simply ignore it. And if everything is valid, it's up to the user to check just a few certain important things that cannot be checked, like programmatically, that it is sent to the address and the amount that you're expecting.
Yeah, that's a good point. On I like the point too, because there's a lot of you talked about the early days where people would have different air gap computers and different things. There's especially now as Bitcoin grows in value and people's holdings grow in value, it's so important to have things that are very super specific with what they're doing. And I think that's a really good point on what a hardware wallet is versus a computer that could have a similar function that someone can put together, especially for our audience and target or a lot of users. They would want something that's so specific that has a little bit of a price tag on it for
Yeah.
that security, right?
And I
Which is
think
pretty minimal compared to the savings. Yeah.
it's really important that the device really has a clear focus. It's purpose built, and it needs to be open source, because only then can you check basically just the delta of every update, of every release. You don't need to check the code all the time. Or, of course, not everybody needs to check the code. There's a lot of many loud people that are able to check the code, and would be super annoying on Twitter if they find anything that is somehow not kosher. So there's a bit of swarm intelligence there. But only with open source you can actually check it, and you don't need to believe what we tell you. And you can, with every release, you can just check the delta and every line of code that has been changed, so that nothing like no backdoors are smuggled in or whatever. And with that assurance, I think it's really, really important to uphold the open source ethos.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So we talked through, okay, people buy Bitcoin, they self-custody Bitcoin, the importance of, offline cold storage, the purpose-built devices. The other thing too that I want to mention to people and make sure to touch on in terms of just very brief touch on security, which people can dig way more into security. You all put out great newsletters as well through Bitbox, and folks can explore on the website. But a lot of folks are putting out education on, if you want to nerd out on security, trust me, there are many people that are great to do this on. Jameson Lopp as well on security things. But the one other thing I wanted to mention is, if you lose your Bitbox or if it is destroyed, there's also the notion of you have your private keys that give you access to your Bitcoin, because Bitcoin never, and this is my take on it. You can feel free to correct or create a better metaphor. and metaphors are imperfect, but it's kind of like Bitcoins are never, they never really vanish. It's just access is revoked or not. They are created and they exist on the blockchain. We're talking about your access to your Bitcoin. And one of the great things about every hardware wallet is that there are different models for backups, right? So if you lose your Bitbox, you're able to restore your private keys and gain access back to your Bitcoin. So can you talk about the way that Bitbox and many other hardware wallets, but I'll say at least with just kind of you have seed phrase backups, you also have micro SD backups, but any type of backups you want to mention and why that's very, very, very important for people who would like to take the step into self custody with a hardware wallet.
Yeah, one point I really want to highlight is that the purpose of a hardware wallet is to to generate the keys and keep the Bitcoin usable in insecure environments. But it's not the purpose of a hardware wallet to keep your coins or keys secure for many decades. So hardware wallets are electronic devices. Stuff can break. It can be the display. It can be whatever. Like you can run over with a car, but it could also like degrade or rust or what, I don't know. Depends on where you live. Maybe next to the sea is less optimal than somewhere in the mountains. But the hardware wallet is not here for long-term storage. This is where the backup comes in. And what is one of our principles is that we don't want to create any form of vendor lock-in. So following open standards that are supported industry-wise is very important. Because let's say if you buy a Bitbox today, you store your Bitcoin on it, and I hope not, but maybe in 20 years, there's no more Bitbox, right? And the thing breaks. You need to be able to restore your backup on a different device, even if it's just an old software wallet that you might run like emergency-wise on an air-gapped computer. It needs to be interoperable, and it must not be that a backup only works with the Bitbox. That's very, very important. And this is where the 12 or 24 words come in, which you can write down in an analog fashion by hand. This is interoperable over all modern hardware wallets, even software wallets. But the good thing about the Bitbox is that this is like more the second step. What we learned from our customers is that if you buy a hardware wallet, you may be a bit unsure, you're not sure how that stuff actually works. And the first thing it asks you is to write down 24 English words. This is creating some sort of like mnemonic anxiety. So you don't really know what that is. You also don't know that the first four characters are unique. So you take like a lot of care to write every word and you double check and whatnot. That can easily take 20 or 30 minutes. And you're like, it's not a good feeling. So this is why if you get the Bitbox, the first backup you make immediately is on a micro SD card, because the Bitbox has an integrated micro SD card reader. And this allows you to set up the Bitbox in under 1 minute. Maybe under 2 is a bit more realistic, but we did a speed run at one point. So I know it can be done under 1 minute. And not being exposed to the seed words also has the advantage that if you, for example, help a friend set up a Bitbox, you don't need to leave the room, because if they write down the words, if you want to do it really properly, you basically need to go away while they do that. And with the Bitbox, you just create the backup on the micro SD cards. You're never visually exposed to any secret information. And you can tell them after that, click here, and then you can write down the 24 words or 12 words in your own time without being under pressure. So this really, I think is very much appreciated by our audience.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. A lot of people that I think are some of the best voices on these topics in Bitcoin when they talk about security, right? Because there's a technically sound way to be the most secure, and maybe it's not accessible by anyone, including yourself, right?
Yes.
So security is a bit of more of a psychological, philosophical approach as well. And Ben DeWall and I talked about this a lot on the What is Bitcoin episode we did a few months ago of like, sometimes the most secure is not the most secure, right? So,
Yes.
and what I mean by that is what makes sense for you? What are you most comfortable with? What type of environment you in? What is your security model? What are all of these things really matter? And that's a simple breakdown right there is having a micro SD versus backup words and things like that. Some people might do both and beyond, and some people might start with one and go to another. And I think it's important for people to not feel like they have to rush into things right away, with Bitcoin security, with something as important as
Exactly.
securing your hope for your family's future and all of these different things with Bitcoin. Taking it one step at a time to make sure that there aren't those user errors that I would say I don't have hard data on this. I've just heard it floated around here and there. There's probably much more user error that happens than actual theft and hacks in terms of different devices or online devices and things like that. People's security models can really mess with them when it
Yeah,
comes
I
to
would
Bitcoin.
definitely second that. And one thing that we sometimes get asked is the backup that you create on the micro SD card is not encrypted by design. Um, because it's not because we're too lazy to put in encryption, because the Bitbox 01 actually had an encrypted micro SD card backup. But as far as I know, this is the only reason users ever lost access to their coins, because only a real, only a transparent backup is a proper backup. If you need a password to your backup, then you need a backup of your password. So you can, of course, like do that over and over and over again. But in the end, it just creates more complexity. And you still have like a sort of information that is unencrypted and you need to keep safe as well. So with the Bitbox, the backup itself, which contains the equivalent of the 12 or 24 recovery words, is not encrypted. So you should treat it carefully, exactly the same as the words that you write down. If people don't want it, they can skip it. But I usually recommend do it anyway, because everything is included, including the micro SD card, and just like tape it to the back of your paper backup. Because if you need to restore it, you're going to be glad that you don't need to enter 24 words on a small device. That can be a bit tedious. So you can restore it in 10 seconds. And you don't lose any security if you have it just together with your paper backup. But if you want to have like the encrypted micro SD card backup, you still can do that indirectly, because then you can use an optional passphrase, which is not part of the backup, neither in the 24 words, of course, and also not part of the micro SD card. So if you choose a proper 25th word, but this is like a bad expression because it's not a word, it's a password. It needs to be complex, like upper, lowercase, and maybe some numbers. If you choose a proper optional passphrase, then you can actually indirectly encrypt the micro SD backup as well, because then the standard wallet is just empty and has never been used.
Yeah. So again, people don't get too overwhelmed here. There's just different options here, and understanding your own security models, I think, is really important. The one other thing I'll add too, because I did it to help me feel a little bit more comfortable early on, but I still periodically do it, is having devices, wiping devices or having blank devices and just completely wiping them and then entering in your seed phrases,
Hmm.
doing this backup, restoring these devices so you know what it's like to, okay, this is as if I lost my Bitbox and I'm, restoring it, or get a different device, and transferring these things is really, really important. So it gives you the comfortability, even though you might rationally know, okay, I know this is what I need to do. Just going through that step to do
Hmm.
that, it's like, oh, cool. Like also seeing, oh, that worked. Okay, there's my Bitcoin, or oh, that's my Bitbox, that's my hardware wallet, is really just an important practice to do as well, for people to feel comfortable, so that the first time if something does happen where you need to do that, that's not the first time that you're experiencing the restoring process. Even though most hardware wallets at this point, and I think what you mentioned, just being good stewards of this technology and resources, everyone sharing and having similar ways to do backups is so, so important, so that if Bitbox or whatever hardware wallet company doesn't exist in a few years, you're still able to access your Bitcoin. Is obviously a very important ethical decision,
Yeah.
and the right business decision as well. I don't think you'd be able to sell as many products doing that, but just having, practice restoring, so that, when you need to, that's not the first time. That's something that helped me feel really good, I'd say.
Yeah, I fully agree. And from a high level perspective, I mean, we are all in the business of making empowering people to use money without middlemen. So we don't want to become the new middleman, right? Which would be the case if there's a vendor lock-in that you need the Bitbox to restore access to your funds, stuff like that. Then it's not really your coins, because if stuff breaks, you need us, and we never want that. And um, I just thought of something else. Not sure what. Maybe I'll come back.
That's okay. I'm glad you brought up one point, because it leads into my last point that I wanted to ask you here was, you want people to be able to to use Bitcoin, to save in Bitcoin, and see as many people doing this as possible. What are your thoughts around, because there's so many different stages of Bitcoin, not just cycles in terms of block sizes, and or block issuance and things like this, in terms of mining cycles and 4-year cycles, but also just world cycles, adoption cycles, all of this. So when we talk about self custody, when we talk about people using Bitcoin, UTXO management is a big thing that's been coming up. How do you envision what Bitcoin looks like going forward, and what are things that are going to be really, really important? I mean, this goes back to Bitcoin fees. Obviously, we saw some fund fee action the past few months. It's kind of died down again, and I think people are not thinking about it as much in terms of fees that it costs to actually use Bitcoin on layer one, which is why these other layers are so important. But when it comes to self custody and UTXO, do you think about these things kind of far into the future, of what self custody and self sovereignty looks like with Bitcoin, which in one regard is kind of the main point of Bitcoin, but in
Hmm.
another regard could get very difficult if billions of people around the world are going to use Bitcoin. So how do you think about that, just on an ethical basis, but on a technological basis as well?
Yeah, these are really hard questions, which I don't have an answer, like a definitive answer, obviously. Um, we're still at a very early stage, I would say, in Bitcoin. I think we're at the first stage, like on chain, where we have come to a pretty good user experience, I would say, but it's still a very early stage. And where we're at today is not scalable to billions of people. So I'm sure there will be many, many different changes and paradigm shifts going forward. For example, the U2XO management you mentioned. If you do a regular DCA of smaller amounts, that can be really tricky, because suddenly you have a lot of dust, and maybe the transaction fees of each coin are higher than the value of the coin itself. So this is stuff that you actually shouldn't need to worry about. But you need to at the moment, because let's say innovation is also a bit limited by the notion that we need to stay compatible with the overall protocol, right? We cannot just like invent something that locks users into a solution that only works with Bitcoin, and they have no way of pulling their stuff out again. So that's kind of a boundary where we constantly pushing against. But there is it's an evolving system. So Lightning is, I think, super important. This is why we're working at integrating Lightning into the Bitbox app as well. It's going to be a hot wallet derived from your regular backup. So you can your Lightning wallet will be part of your regular backup on the micro SD card. You can restore it at any time, and you can even use it from multiple devices. But it's a hot wallet because Lightning works only in this way that you need to sign stuff on demand, and you cannot always like plug your Bitcoin or Bitbox in and wait until you receive funds to sign something. That would be terrible UX. But that's like the layer two that I think will become more important, especially for daily transactions. We support Lightning for years now in our shop. I think we were the first and only ones back in the day that had that. And it's awesome. It's the only thing, even at conferences, if we're in the US or even in Europe, it's always such a pain to receive credit card payments. Usually you're not even legally allowed as a Swiss company to collect credit card payments abroad. But Bitcoin just works. I mean, on a regular basis, selling Bitboxes, Bitcoin is the best money there is. And going from that Lightning, I'm sure there will be like opening channels, closing channels. That's also something that you shouldn't really need to worry about. There are already solutions that manage that in the background. And I'm sure there will be many more innovations. But the main thing, and this is, I think, is where the big blockers and many altcoiners fundamentally differ from my understanding of how something like that can work. I think it's absolutely essential that we grow Bitcoin in layers. Everything in IT, be it networking or applications, everything is built in layers. Because the good thing is the base layer doesn't need to do everything. It can do like something really, really well, but be super hard to use. And then you build on top of that and on top of that and on top of that. And in an open permissionless system like Bitcoin, if you have a base layer like we have now with the Bitcoin blockchain, I don't really find it necessary to buy a coffee for $5 and broadcast that transaction to every Bitcoin holder on the planet. That might be a bit overkill, but it's there, it works if I need it. But we can build on top of that and use the base layer as an arbitration layer or something like that, like Lightning does. But even if Lightning should fail, there can be many different layer twos, and there's like an evolution going on until something really proves itself to be workable in everyday life, have a use case, which many altcoins still struggle today to actually have some sort of real world relevance. And even if something totally flops and is just an experiment, it doesn't really affect the base layer. So you have a culture where you can have permissionless innovation without endangering the whole system itself, right? And I think that's very, very important, because I don't think in a benevolent dictator that knows how to build that stuff over a decade, that's just not going to work. I believe in evolution, and that stuff is evolving through experimentation, and stuff fails and stuff gets better and has market fit. That's also important. And if that's the case, people will adopt it. But other stuff will just fade away again, and that's totally okay.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting the next few years. I think, and again, I've only read about this stuff, like I mentioned, block size wars and all these other things. I don't want to say in terms of fighting within the community, but it'll be very, very interesting to see, because we're just talking about it for a while. It was just Bitcoin and different things within the protocol that people would propose, or block size, like you mentioned, and then there's Lightning, and then there's eCash. There's going to be so many other layers, and are discussed, that I don't think we're even prepared for what that looks like in terms of projects and use cases. So I still feel like there's quite a phase of fun experimentation that people should feel good about and encourage and support devs. Because just as you mentioned, we're taking these things as layers. These are not things that are impacting the Bitcoin layer one, Bitcoin base chain, like Bitcoin. And that's very purposeful and that's very important. So having these other projects and other layers on top of that that foundation is really cool. And I think it's so hard to even predict what that's going to look like in 5 years, but it should be fun for folks like yourself to think through and do.
Yeah, it's an awesome time to be alive and be part of that, and basically work and dedicate my professional life to this is like I couldn't hope for anything better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, folks, we have more bonus content coming for our paid subscribers that I'm going to ask some other fun and juicy questions to Stadicus. We're going to talk about different things that I like to think about and talk about, like, what is it like being in Europe, in like a Swiss company, thinking through what's happening in the US with Bitcoin companies, with the election, and how everything gets politicized, which is crazy. And we talk about a lot on the show. We're going to ask some more questions about different security tips and tricks for folks to think about. So you don't want to miss the rest of this conversation. So if you want to get access to that and you don't already, you can go to our show notes in the Substack, progressivebitcoiner.substack.com/subscribe to get access to that. So be sure to do that.